Hello everybody, and welcome to the third episode of Existential Basics. I'm Mark with the Modern Existentialist, and I'll be your host today. So last time, we covered the concept of fundamental subjectivity, the idea that truth is knowledge that we create. If you haven't seen that episode, I'd recommend you go back and watch that before coming back to join us for this one. Alright, so let's talk technical terms. They might be a little dry and abstract at first, but they'll come in handy later. So bear with it and make sure you try and keep them in mind. These terms are subject and object. A subject is what we call an actor or an agent, someone who has the power or agency to act on the world. In other words, you or me, or anyone else who's a conscious individual. An object, on the other hand, is, well, it's literally an object. It's something within the world that can be acted on by agents, by us, as subjects. So, what it means for something to be subjective, then, is that it's something that you think or that you believe, something that arises from our individual agency. And what it means for something to be objective, then, is for it to be a fact of the world, or of reality. We established last time, though, that according to our principle of fundamental subjectivity, that, to the best of our knowledge, our reality appears to us only how we perceive it. We can't know any information to be strictly real, strictly objective in its nature. We can't know that something is an undeniable metaphysical fact of the world, because we can never confirm it. So, if our ideas of meaning, value, and truth, concepts that we might have originally assumed to be immovable objective truths, are actually just subjective values, then what does meaning mean? If our values don't hold inherent value, if we can't consider them objective, then what can truth even be? If our world is a fiction, just something that we make up, then doesn't that mean that, in the end, nothing that really matters to us actually exists? That nothing really matters at all? The world is cold and uncaring. A bleak, barren wasteland, completely devoid of any real, true meaning. We come and go as ash and soil. In between, we are nothing but sacks of flesh and bile. That is what the Nihilist believes. Welcome to a brief summary of Nihilist-Absurdist theory, a pair of philosophies which, in the Western tradition, are usually attributed to Schopenhauer and Camus, and may or may not have since transformed into the battle cry of edgy teens everywhere. Everything is meaningless is the mantra of the nihilist, though typically they don't think of themselves as such dark or depressive people. Usually, they'll style themselves as tragic pragmatists or realists, or something to that effect. Just people that have come to terms with a fundamental objective truth of the world. They believe that they've arrived at this kind of transcendent metaphysical wisdom. The knowledge that nothing is really real, and that everything moves inevitably toward a final, meaningless end. They believe that, because we're nothing more than just a brain and a body, because we live a fiction and can't access an objective reality, our existence is therefore fake, a lie and a sham, and that the real, true, objective nature of existence is just a meaningless nothing. Okay, so, do you see a problem yet? If you do, hang on to that thought, because we're not done yet. Let's keep going. This next step here, where the nihilist chooses either to lay down and wallow in his despair, or to come to terms with his realization and just sit there forever, staring at nothing in stoic silence. This is where the absurdist first takes to the stage, where the nihilist is content to just let go, to deny his own agency and let himself sink into the futility of his meaningless condition. The absurdist chooses to rebel instead, embracing his fundamental subjectivity, where the nihilist believes that he's impotent, that nothing he can ever do will ever amount to anything. The absurdist instead believes that because everything is meaningless, because nothing will ever amount to anything, he is therefore perfectly free, and perfectly and completely his own man, completely and totally a subject. The absurdist believes that existence is, well, absurd. That even though existence is fundamentally meaningless, even though it's an objective fact of reality, that our reality is fake, we, as human beings, are still somehow compelled by our biology to seek meaning within the world. That's what it means to say that existence is absurd. That we feel that we must seek, even though we know that we will never find, meaning in our lives. If nothing means anything, if the world we live in is just a simulation, then that means that there are no restrictions, nothing to ever hold you back again. If the world is fake, just a fantasy born from our imaginations, then that means that there can never be any consequences. When we die, it's all over. So, while we're still here and still alive, we're free to live our fullest lives. And so, the absurdist walks his path of revolt, to rebel against the absurd and say this: there is no meaning, no such thing as value or truth. And that's okay. That's good, because that means we're truly free. Okay, so there's a sense in which nihilism and absurdism are opposites. That is, in the sense that nihilists are just the sad ones, and absurdists are just the happy ones. The sense in which nihilists reject their agency, and absurdists choose to embrace it. In the other sense, though, the sense in which they're the same, nihilist-absurdist theory, as a whole, claims that existence is inherently and objectively meaningless. Do you see the problem here? Let's break it down. The fundamental flaw in nihilist-absurdist theory is that the philosophers of their tradition believe that they're empirically correct, but that in reality, they're actually all empirically wrong. The nihilist and the absurdist both, after all, base their theory on the idea that the dogma of the world is wrong, that existence is not inherently meaningful, as the majority of people might claim. And in this, they're correct. After all, existence is not inherently meaningful. Where they go wrong, though, is in this next step of their reasoning, that they assume that because the world is not inherently meaningful, it must therefore be inherently meaningless. In formulating their rejection of dogma, they took a logical leap, and then immediately tripped, falling flat on their faces. They believe that they've rejected dogma, but in reality, all they did was reject a dogma. The dogma that everybody else believes. And then, they replaced it with their own. The fundamental problem with nihilist-absurdist theory is that they failed to reject inherence, to reject dogmatism as a whole. What they've done instead is just embrace a different dogma, a dogma that rejects meaning. We can't claim, as the nihilist and absurdist do, that we know that meaning is inherently absent, because that's a claim to metaphysical knowledge. A claim to know something to be absolutely true, even though we can never observe or confirm it. The best we can say is that we know that there is no inherent meaning, because that is what we can confirm empirically. So, we can see that the nihilist and absurdist formulate a dogmatic rejection of dogma, that existence is not inherently meaningful, but instead inherently meaningless. The empirical evidence, after all, doesn't lead us to conclude that there's no meaning or value in existence, because meaning, like truth, is a value that we create. It should be obvious, after all, that there is meaning in the world, because things mean things to you. If it were the case that nothing could be meaningful, then words themselves couldn't have meaning, meaning that you and I couldn't, in the first place, be having a conversation about meaning. The fact that we create meaning doesn't make that meaning fake, because the fact that we have created it makes it entirely real to us. Our reality is a fiction. Therefore, our fiction is our reality. So, using our principle of fundamental subjectivity, we can demonstrate that existence both can't be inherently meaningful, because meaning is value that we assign, and also can't be inherently meaningless, because meaning is value that we assign. Existence just isn't inherently anything at all. Existentialism is an empirical philosophy. What that means is that, in order to reach a rational conclusion, we have to work slowly and methodically, by process of elimination. We, as existentialists, have to deconstruct every claim to knowledge or truth and test its empirical validity, before we can decide whether or not we'll believe it. That's why we attack, question, and try to destroy every belief system that we find, including our own. It's not out of malice, not because of arrogance or spite, but because we choose to value the truth that we can know. After all, if someone believes that something is the truth, then they should be able to defend their position and demonstrate why they believe it's the truth. And, if they can, then maybe we'd have a reason to believe it's true too. Alright, so, how do you feel now that you've got an answer to nihilist philosophy and the musings of edgy teens? What do you think of absurdist philosophy? Is it really just happy nihilism? Think on it some, then let me know down in the comments what you come up with. Alright, this is Mark, signing off. Catch you guys on the next one.